Hey guys, it looks like you're back for more. Welcome back. I just wanted to make a few comments on some of the things that were posted on this week and just some things in general that I wanted to make sure and mention to you still regarding the Code of Professional Conduct. Quite a bit of the discussion we've had this week has been on confidentiality, and again, because it's a major topic definitely in our field. A few things that people have asked about confidentiality are, what kinds of details can you tell? And, you know, as we go through the course of the class, you're going to see that I'm going to give you a variety of ethical scenarios that I personally have been in. In fact, I would say 99% of what I tell you I've experienced myself, and if I haven't, it's something that a friend of mine has experienced. And so you may think that some of the scenarios we talk about are ludicrous, but I promise you that they happen. So what I will say though is when I'm giving you guys these ethical scenarios, I don't give an exact timestamp, or if I do, it's probably wrong. I don't give you the exact, I definitely don't give you names. I don't give you ages unless it's relevant or an approximate age. Very often I'll try to mix up the gender unless it's an OBGYN visit. Obviously I can't do that, but you know, I try to mix up certain elements of the scenario so that you guys will never be able to trace it back to the actual person that it happened to. And that's kind of how you need to be, especially if you're seeking advice on a situation. You may even wait until a little bit after the situation has happened. Use the OB-GYN example. You know, there may only be one deaf pregnant woman in the city of Houston at this time. And so if you were to bring a scenario up to a friend of yours, they may know exactly who you're talking about. So you may need to wait some time before you get some advice on how you should have handled a situation if that's the case, if that makes sense. So in general, we try to keep as many details as possible, you know, just, I don't know, out of the way. You definitely don't want to give too much of that information out. In addition to that, I wanted to mention, a few of you guys had mentioned about consumers talking about who you are and what you're doing. There have been plenty of times where I've been out in the community and consumers will come up to me, hearing or deaf, and they'll say, "Hey, I remember you, you interpreted in my class and you did this and you did that." It's totally fine. They can talk about whatever they want to talk about. Whatever they want to talk about is fine. However, I don't offer up any information, even if they've brought it up. You know, even if they come up to me and say, "Hey, I remember you interpreted in my class," I will not say, "Hey, how's your wife's cancer treatment going?" Maybe they don't want people to know that. I mean, anything that I knew about that was directly from that interpreted situation, I do not divulge. I may acknowledge, obviously, that I know who they are, but I'm not going to bring up any details of the situation that was interpreted. That's solely for them to do. Some examples of some times when confidentiality has come up, and it's funny because deaf people, sometimes they'll try to entrap you, and not just the deaf people, the hearing people too. You know, and so you need to be really vigilant about what you do. Sometimes they do know the Code of Professional Conduct, and they just want to see if you're going to follow it. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. I had two deaf students at a college one time who I knew, and the other interpreter that was working with me, we both knew that these two deaf students were taking the exact same biology class from the exact same teacher, but just at different times, and we didn't tell them. And so we were talking to one deaf student, and another deaf student walked up and said, "Hey, so what classes are you taking this semester?" And so they start talking about it, and they realize that they're taking the same biology teacher, the same class. And so one deaf student looks at us and says, "Why didn't you tell me so-and-so was taking biology with that teacher? I would have taken it with them." And the other deaf person looked at them and pushed them and was like, "Hey, they can't tell you that information. I'm glad they didn't tell you. If you want to know my schedule, you come ask me." And so it was a good moment because that deaf person, both of them at that point, realized we're not going to tell your information to other people, you know. And so that's one example. Another example that I thought was kind of funny is I got an assignment to go work at a university one time. And when I got the class information, I knew immediately that I had a family member that was in that class. And I didn't say a thing. And so I got to the class, and my family member walks up to me and they're like, "Why didn't you tell me you were interpreting today? We could have written together. We could have done this." And the deaf person looked at me and looked at my family member, and they were like, "Who's that?" And I was like, "Oh, that's so-and-so, my family member." And the deaf person was like, "You didn't even tell them that you were coming to this class?" And I was like, "No, your information is confidential. I'm not going to tell people." And they were so impressed by that, and I think that it's a good thing because even though it may seem hyper-vigilant to some people, I would always, me personally, again, this is Lael, this is not every interpreter in the world, me, Lael, I would prefer to err on the side of confidentiality if I have to err, if that makes sense. So, anyway, a few other things. I had students propose to me one time an ethical scenario, and they were like, let's say, this is totally hypothetical, let's say that you interpret a medical assignment for a deaf person early in the day, and you know that this deaf guy has HIV. And then you go to a club with your sister later. By the way, my sister's married, but that's beside the point. You go to a club with your sister later, and she decides that she wants to hook up with this guy. What do you do? And I looked at my students and I told them straight. I was like, I'd tell her. And they were like, you can't do that. That's confidential information. You can't do that. But you know what? If I lose my certification, I lose my certification. My family comes first. And there are certain things in this world that I would be willing to lose my certification over. If it means I have to work at Mickey D's for the rest of my life, then I'm going to do that. You know, and again, I could be crucified by a lot of people for saying that, but it's just the truth. And I may not come out right and tell my sister, but I may tell my sister, I know the deaf community a lot better than you do, and I know when it's safe for you to do something, and I know when it's not safe for you to do something, and I think you should trust me. You know, and I know my sister well enough that she would just follow that. I probably wouldn't have to say more than that, but you know, anyway, so it's something to think about. I do think that you need to know yourself well enough to know what are your boundaries. What are you willing to do? What would you be willing to lose your certification over? And if it came to that, I think that you could justify a lot of situations, but you've always got to keep that in the back of your mind. And you know what? If I can't look myself in the mirror in the morning because of a decision that I made, then I'm going to be willing to lose my certification over that. And I'm okay with that. And you need to know what are your boundaries. What are you willing to do and what aren't you willing to do. We're going to discuss a little bit more in some upcoming videos as well, but I just want to make those comments on confidentiality for this week. Guess that's it. Thanks.